You are not who you think you are. You are a collection of programs, belief structures, symbols, narratives, running inside a biocomputer you call yourself. And if you're brave or reckless enough, you might decide to hack that computer. You might begin to deconstruct those programs, to suspend all beliefs, to reject every ideology, every certainty, until nothing remains. That, right there, is the terrifying experiment Robert Anton Wilson performed, and it almost destroyed him. You may think you've heard of experiments in consciousness, psychedelics, meditation, altered states, but what Ra did went further. It wasn't just an experiment in altered states. It was an experiment in destroying the very structures that hold your mind together. In his landmark works, Prometheus Rising, Cosmic Trigger, Wilson chronicled this process with chilling honesty. At first, it sounds liberating, freeing yourself from dogma, from propaganda, from unconscious conditioning. But what happens when you succeed too well? What happens when the programs collapse entirely and all meaning dissolves? Wilson gave that terrifying state a name, Chapel Perilous, a psychological terrain where nothing seems true but everything feels possible, a place where people either emerge transformed or lose their minds. In this video, we're going deep. Who was Robert Anton Wilson? Why did he warn about this experiment? What happens when belief itself collapses? And how does this eerily predict today's psychological landscape? And most chilling of all, would you survive Chapel Perilous? Robert Anton Wilson was one of the most radical thinkers of the 20th century, a philosopher, psychologist, futurist, Discordian, prankster, and mystic rolled into one. Born in Brooklyn in 1932, Wilson grew up skeptical of all authority, political, religious, scientific. He immersed himself in philosophy, science fiction, psychology, and esoteric traditions. In the 1960s and 70s, he became a key figure in counterculture thought, deeply influenced by Timothy Leary's psychedelic research and the model agnosticism movement. He wasn't a guru. In fact, he mocked gurus. But he taught people how to recognize that every worldview is just that, a view from a certain position, never the whole landscape. His most famous works, the Illuminatus trilogy, Prometheus Rising, Cosmic Trigger, weren't just books. They were mind bombs, playful, chaotic, and dangerously destabilizing. Wilson was obsessed with a single question: how much of what you experience is real, and how much is simply the product of your conditioned reality tunnel? A reality tunnel is Wilson's term for the lens through which you interpret everything: your politics, your morals, your identity, your worldview. And because these tunnels are shaped by experience, culture, upbringing, biology, everyone's tunnel is different. But Wilson didn't stop there. He believed that if you could become aware of your reality tunnel, you could transcend it. And if you could transcend it, you could build a new one. This was radical cognitive liberty as the freedom to construct reality itself. But there was a catch. At first glance, Robert Anton Wilson's philosophy feels like a path to freedom. Reality tunnels, conditioning, scripts imposed by family, culture, government. Surely we should break free from all that. The project seems noble. Strip away false belief. Suspend judgment. Look directly at reality without filters. But Wilson warned, there's a moment when this process becomes too successful. A moment when the mind, having dissolved one layer of illusion, begins to dissolve the next, and then the next, until all structure erodes. This is Chapel Perilous. Chapel Perilous sounds poetic, mystical, and it is. The term originally comes from Arthurian legend, a place on the hero's journey filled with illusion, danger, and confusion, a threshold between worlds. But Wilson gave the term a psychological twist. In Cosmic Trigger, he described Chapel Perilous as the state a person enters after they've deconstructed too many belief systems, a state where nothing seems true but everything feels possible. Here's how he put it. In Chapel Perilous, you cannot believe anything you see or hear. You become agnostic about everything. Your political opinions, your social beliefs, your moral values, your most cherished dogmas. Nothing seems true, but everything could be true. The result is a peculiar psychological state, much feared by psychologists, in which you begin to question not only your reality, but your sanity. And first, this sounds liberating, total freedom, but it's terrifying, because we are not just creatures of reason, we are creatures of structure. We need patterns, we need some framework to navigate life. Without it, reality itself dissolves. Wilson observed that many people who enter Chapel Perilous do not return whole. Some become permanently paranoid. If all beliefs are arbitrary, then conspiracies must be everywhere. The walls melt, and monsters lurk behind every shadow. Others collapse into nihilism. If nothing is true, then nothing matters. Or worse, some slip into schizophrenia, overwhelmed by competing signals, unable to parse fantasy from fact. In Chapel Perilous, meaning itself becomes liquid. Time, identity, morality, all the fixed categories by which we organize our lives, dissolve into uncertainty. Even cause and effect begins to feel unreliable. You may wonder, am I awake? Am I dreaming? Is this thought mine? Is this perception real? Wilson described Chapel Perilous as the inevitable result of extreme belief suspension. In Prometheus Rising, he outlined exercises for reprogramming the mind, challenging political beliefs, playing with moral relativism, trying on different religions like costumes, practicing skepticism toward all sensory input. The idea was to free oneself from rigid patterns. But here's the dark truth. If you suspend too many beliefs too quickly, your mind may not know how to function anymore. It begins when your critical thinking becomes reflexive. You question not just dogmas, but perceptions themselves. Is this table real? Am I experiencing this event or just imagining it? Did this memory really happen, or was it planted by suggestion? From there, the collapse accelerates. All dualities begin to blur. Self/other, right/wrong, true/false, real/unreal. Soon, you're in free fall. Robert Anton Wilson didn't say this to scare you away from questioning reality. In fact, he encouraged it, but with caution. He knew that what he was offering was not a spiritual bypass, but a kind of cognitive razor's edge. If you can navigate Chapel Perilous, you come out the other side free, flexible, awake. But if you get lost there, you may never return whole. This is why Chapel Perilous is so aptly named. It's a perilous chapel, a temple of liberation that can also become a crypt. Wilson hinted that anyone seriously engaging with self-deprogramming techniques might start to notice these warning signs. An overwhelming sense that all perspectives are equally valid and equally false. Anxiety that there is no real self behind your thoughts, only a web of programs running automatically. Hyper-awareness of synchronicities, perceiving connections between events that may or may not exist. Sudden mood swings as old belief structures dissolve. A profound sense of vertigo, not physical, but existential. In this state, reality itself can feel like a hall of mirrors, and when there are too many mirrors, there's nowhere left to stand. What made Robert Anton Wilson's work so compelling and so dangerous was that he didn't just theorize about Chapel Perilous, he went there himself. Wilson was a practitioner. His books weren't armchair philosophy, they were maps drawn from his own experiments in consciousness, and the most dangerous experiment he ever conducted was this: total suspension of belief, not partial, not selective, but across every dimension of reality. Wilson's method was rooted in something he called model agnosticism. In his words, "I don't believe anything, but I have many suspicions." Model agnosticism is the practice of holding all beliefs lightly, recognizing that every worldview, scientific, religious, ideological, is a model rather than absolute truth. At first, this approach feels liberating. You free yourself from rigid ideology. You stop mistaking your map for the territory. You gain flexibility and perspective. But Wilson took this further than anyone. He systematically dismantled every belief structure in his psyche. Religion, gone. Morality, questioned. Selfhood, dissolved. Even physical reality, held in doubt. He trained himself to adopt and discard worldviews at will, slipping from atheism to mysticism, from libertarianism to communism, from conspiracy theories to skepticism, all in a matter of hours. For Wilson, this was cognitive freedom at its peak. But there was a catch. The more he deconstructed, the less stable his mind became. In Cosmic Trigger, Wilson describes what happened when he pushed this too far. Suddenly, the world became unrecognizable. Synchronicities multiplied, eerie coincidences that felt loaded with meaning but defied explanation. Events seemed orchestrated, but by whom? By what? He began to see connections everywhere, patterns, symbols, alignments, but with no way to know if they were real or simply hallucinations. He described this as an overwhelming flood of meaning without structure. In psychological terms, this is what happens when the cognitive framework collapses completely. Your brain, desperate to organize perception, begins to over-organize, attributing significance to random noise. This mirrors what happens to people in extreme isolation, sensory deprivation, or certain psychedelic states. The absence of structure leads to hallucinations. The absence of certainty breeds paranoia. The absence of a stable self leads to existential vertigo. Wilson felt himself slipping toward madness. In this terrifying state, all categories blur. Good and evil lose definition. True and false melt into ambiguity. Self and other dissolve. Even time itself loses linearity. Memories feel dreamlike. The present feels slippery. The future feels pre-written. At its most intense, this collapse leads to ego death, a total dissolution of the self as a separate, continuous entity. For some mystics and advanced meditators, this is the goal, the ultimate awakening, the shattering of illusion. But for most people, and for Wilson at this point, this collapse is terrifying. Why? Because ego death without preparation doesn't feel like liberation. It feels like psychosis. In Prometheus Rising, Wilson describes this moment honestly. Chapel Perilous is where the rational mind begins to disintegrate, where your reality tunnel has collapsed, but you haven't yet built a new one. You don't know what's real. You don't know who you are. He warned that this state is not enlightenment. It's perilous precisely because the old structures are gone, but nothing has replaced them. Most people in Chapel Perilous crave an anchor. They seize the first belief system that offers comfort, often becoming fundamentalist in their attachment. Some adopt rigid conspiracy theories, others fall into cults, some descend into paranoia or delusion. A few manage to rebuild a flexible, playful, agnostic mind, but it's a narrow path. Wilson's experiment eerily mirrors reports from advanced meditation practitioners and psychedelic psychonauts. In deep meditation, practitioners can experience the collapse of subject-object duality, leading to terrifying ego dissolution if unprepared. In high-dose psychedelic sessions, users often report overwhelming synchronicities, dissolving categories, a sense of everything is connected and nothing is true. This is why Tibetan Buddhist training emphasizes gradual progression, not jumping directly into dissolution, but preparing the mind carefully. Wilson's warning is the same. Don't deconstruct too fast. Don't hack your mind recklessly. Chapel Perilous is real, and you may not find your way out. Why would Wilson, a brilliant, self-aware thinker, push himself into this terrifying state? Because the seduction of absolute freedom is powerful. The promise of total liberation from all mental conditioning. The dream of seeing reality raw, unfiltered, naked. But this seduction comes at a price. Without belief structures, there is no map. Without a map, the terrain itself becomes chaotic. And chaos, unbounded and unfiltered, can break a mind. Wilson survived, but barely. He spent months rebuilding a coherent reality tunnel, one flexible enough to play with beliefs, but stable enough to avoid collapse. In doing so, he became one of the rare individuals who could speak honestly from inside Chapel Perilous, and return with a warning. In the 1970s, when Robert Anton Wilson was writing about Chapel Perilous, radical agnosticism, and the collapse of belief structures, the world was still relatively stable by today's standards. Information moved slowly. The number of competing narratives was limited by gatekeepers, newspapers, TV networks, books. Reality tunnels were tribal, yes, but they moved at human speed. But today, we live in the age of algorithmic reality tunnels, far more pervasive and dangerous than anything Wilson could have foreseen. His terrifying experiment, total belief suspension, collapsing categories, dismantling narratives, has become the unintentional experiment that modern culture is performing on itself. Today's algorithms, social media feeds, search engines, personalized recommendations, don't just respond to your preferences, they shape them. You scroll your feed and it learns what provokes you, what triggers you, what keeps you swinging between outrage, envy, desire, indignation, and then it feeds you more. It creates a tunnel, your tunnel, one perfectly tailored to your biases, emotions, fears, hopes. But unlike Wilson's self-directed journey into Chapel Perilous, today's tunnels are engineered for profit. They lead you deeper and deeper, until your beliefs are no longer your own. This is what Wilson feared: the death of stable, coherent belief structures, replaced not by freedom, but by engineered chaos. One of Wilson's insights was that everyone lives in their own reality tunnel. That's fine. It's part of human subjectivity. But what happens when those tunnels stop overlapping? In the past, there were at least points of shared narrative, common reference points, the nightly news, public institutions, shared cultural anchors, agreements about facts. Today, those shared anchors are gone. One person's feed shows conspiracy theories. Another's feed shows outrage bait. Another's feed shows curated positivity. Each feed reinforces a different real. This is algorithmically engineered Chapel Perilous, a globalized, perpetual state of disbelief and distrust, where nothing seems true, but everything feels possible. Sound familiar? It should. We're living inside the very psychological landscape Wilson described as perilous, but this time, not as individuals experimenting with their minds, but as entire societies. Wilson was fascinated by conspiracy theories. In fact, the Illuminatus trilogy satirized the way people construct narratives out of chaos, seeing hidden hands behind every event. But Wilson himself fell prey to the paranoia at times, overwhelmed by synchronicities and seemingly meaningful coincidences. Today, conspiracy thinking has gone mainstream. The internet, with its infinite rabbit holes, has turned Chapel Perilous from a fringe psychological experiment into a mass phenomenon. People who suspend trust in institutions, understandably given corruption and history, often fall into the trap of seeing patterns everywhere. The result? Hyperconnectivity. Everything is linked. Hypermeaning. Nothing is random. Hyperdistrust. Question everything, except my favorite guru or influencer. This is the modern version of Wilson's experiment, but done recklessly at scale, without preparation. Wilson emphasized that belief suspension was useful, but dangerous when accelerated or done without psychological preparation. Modern life collapses belief structures whether you want it or not. A few decades ago, a person could go their entire life inside a coherent reality tunnel, never questioning it deeply. Now, even casual scrolling exposes you to contradictions, conflicting ideologies, conflicting scientific claims, conflicting moral frameworks. You are bombarded by contradictions 24/7, and your mind tries desperately to resolve them. Some people give up and fall into nihilism. Others seek refuge in rigid tribalism, the political or ideological equivalent of grasping for any handhold in the swirling chaos. But a few remain suspended in perpetual Chapel Perilous, confused, anxious, overwhelmed. Here's what's chilling. Wilson predicted this before the internet. He warned that radical deconstruction would lead to psychological vertigo, a mass breakdown of shared reality and personal coherence. In his time, it was a fringe experiment. Today, it's daily life. The average person is now exposed to more contradictory information in a day than a 17th century person encountered in a year. This cognitive overload is breaking minds, not metaphorically but literally. Rates of anxiety, depression, paranoia, and dissociation have skyrocketed. The symptoms of Chapel Perilous are everywhere: rising distrust, rising conspiracy thinking, rising identity confusion, rising cynicism and nihilism. Wilson's experiment was supposed to be a private test for the psychonaut or philosopher. Now, it's been scaled up and unleashed on the world. So what can you do? If today's world itself has become a kind of collective Chapel Perilous, If you are bombarded daily by contradictory narratives, collapsing belief structures, algorithmically tailored chaos, how do you avoid losing your mind? Robert Anton Wilson didn't leave us with only a warning. He offered guidance. Not simple answers, because he didn't believe in simple answers, but tools. Subtle, paradoxical tools. Wilson emphasized that he was not preaching nihilism or cynicism. He wasn't saying, don't believe anything ever. He was saying, hold your beliefs lightly. Model agnosticism means treating every belief as a temporary lens, a map that helps you navigate, but never confusing it for the territory itself. In a world of algorithmic tunnels, this means practicing flexibility. Be willing to question your own certainties. Try on different perspectives, but don't get stuck inside them. Recognize the distinction between what is useful and what is true. This isn't easy. It requires constant awareness, a kind of intellectual jujitsu, but it protects you from becoming rigid and from drowning in total doubt. Wilson's antidote to paranoia was play. When synchronicities multiplied, when reality blurred, when nothing seemed real. He encouraged playfulness, a kind of existential humor. Laugh at your own reality tunnel. Laugh at your seriousness. Laugh at your certainty and your doubt. In a world that demands outrage, tribalism, and polarization, this is radical. Playfulness interrupts the pendulum swings of emotional manipulation. Playfulness is detachment without apathy. Wilson believed that the mind that can laugh is the mind that can stay sane, even in Chapel Perilous. Here's the most paradoxical lesson Wilson offered. You can't escape reality tunnels, but you can design them consciously. In other words, rather than passively inheriting a worldview from algorithms, culture, or tradition, build one that serves you. Pick the values you want to live by. Choose the metaphors that empower you. Surround yourself with symbols, ideas, stories that nourish rather than poison. But do it knowingly. Wilson called this meta-programming. It's not about finding the one true belief system. It's about crafting one that you know is a model, but that works for you. This is where Wilson was most optimistic. The mind is programmable, but you can choose the program. If you remember that, and if you remember that your program is never the territory itself, you can stay flexible, adaptable, sane. Wilson's final insight is haunting. Chapel Perilous isn't something you can avoid anymore. You are already in it. The erosion of stable narratives, the collapse of certainty, the flood of competing signals. This is the world now. There's no going back to a simpler time. But Wilson's experiment suggests that you can go through it skillfully. You can accept that reality is stranger than you think. Hold beliefs lightly, but don't collapse into nihilism. Maintain humor and playfulness even as certainties dissolve. Design a reality tunnel that helps you navigate without becoming trapped. This is not easy. It's a high-wire act, but it's the act required for survival today. At the end of the day, Wilson's terrifying experiment is being conducted globally, whether you like it or not. The algorithms are running. The information floods never stop. Certainty is scarce. You're already inside Chapel Perilous. The question is, will you navigate it with awareness? Will you hold your beliefs as tools, not truths? Will you keep your sense of humor intact, even as reality itself wobbles and blurs? Wilson left us a roadmap. Not a prescription, but a playful, paradoxical guide. Treat life like a game you play consciously. Know that your mind is programmable, and you can do the programming. Laugh at yourself. Refuse to let any ideology, guru, or algorithm lock you into a rigid tunnel. In his own words, Wilson once wrote, "You should view the world as a conspiracy run by a very closely knit group of nearly omnipotent people, and you should think of that group as yourself." It's poetic, it's ironic, it's profound, and it leaves us with the final, chilling truth. The terrifying experiment that Robert Anton Wilson warned to avoid is now the experiment we're all living through. And your mind, playful, flexible, adaptable, is your only hope of making it through intact. So here we are, the end of this video, or is it the beginning of the experiment? You may think you've simply watched a video on YouTube. You may believe you chose to click on this topic. You may believe your thoughts, even now, belong to you. but Robert Anton Wilson would whisper something unsettling in your ear. Your choices, your clicks, your thoughts, all of them could already be shaped by the reality tunnel you never knew you inherited. You might walk away from this video thinking, I'm awake now. I understand Chapel Perilous. I'll avoid it. But that's exactly the trap, because awareness itself can become a reality tunnel. Non-belief can become a new kind of dogma. Skepticism can become a prison as tight as fanaticism. This is what makes Wilson's warning timeless and terrifying. There is no way out of this experiment. There is no outside to step into. There is only how you play inside it. Look around you. Everyone you know is caught in competing tunnels, some clinging to ideology, some spiraling into conspiracy, some paralyzed in nihilism, some numbed by endless streams of algorithmic entertainment. And here you are, caught in your own experiment. Your mind is processing this very moment. The tone of this narration, the eerie music swelling in the background, the images flashing across the screen. All of this is part of your reality tunnel. Right now. Even Robert Anton Wilson, the prankster philosopher who tried to outwit the traps, ended up caught in them too, questioning his own sanity as he flirted with Chapel Perilous. So what's the final message? There's no exit strategy from Chapel Perilous. There's only grace inside it. Grace in laughing at your illusions. Grace in holding every belief lightly, including your belief that you are free. Grace in recognizing that even uncertainty can become a cage, unless you dance with it. Wilson never promised salvation. He promised awareness, not as an endpoint, but as a balancing act. Stay flexible. Stay playful. Stay conscious of the pendulums that try to provoke your swing. In a world where narratives collapse and no story can claim absolute truth anymore, this might be the only form of freedom left. Not freedom from all tunnels, but freedom to recognize that you are always in one and to choose how lightly you walk its corridors. And so the question returns to you. What tunnel are you in right now? And who, or what, is programming it? This video is ending, but your experiment is just beginning.